Hi, I'm Dr. Corey Miller, CEO of Ratio Christi Campus Apologetics Alliance. We are on 150 universities in the U.S. and around the world. My principal guest for this episode of Thoughtful Christianity is Dr. Nicholas Meriwether. He is a philosophy professor at Shawnee State University in Ohio, and he is joined with us by someone who's no stranger to our podcast, his attorney, Travis Barham, who works with Alliance Defending Freedom. Welcome to Thoughtful Christianity, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, with this topic that we're going to be discussing here, free speech, freedom of conscience, and what is your preferred gender? I probably could get myself in trouble just by saying, welcome to Thoughtful Christianity, gentlemen.
Indeed.
We are in a new arena completely that I don't think anywhere in the history of the world has traversed. We're walking on eggshells. You can't say certain things, even if it's innocent and you don't realize that you stepped in it. You're not even trying to engage in it and you step in it.
Right.
So Dr. Meriwether, I have followed your story with interest because one, I'm a philosopher, did graduate work at Purdue, where you also did your PhD. I taught academic philosophy at Indiana University, and likewise, I had to get an attorney to defend not only my free speech, but cognitive liberty, because a former pastor who turned gay charged me with creating a dangerous and suicidal environment in the classroom simply because I brought up multiple viewpoints concerning homosexuality. Right. And, the text was by an atheist, an anti-Christian author and pro-gay. And I thought I was allowed to educate rather than indoctrinate. But the universities seem to want something different. So your case is a fascinating case. You're almost like the Jordan Peterson of Canada here. Let's begin with that legal case. And maybe Travis Barham, elaborate on what is the nature of the case and what happened, first of all.
So you're asking what happened to me to get the case started.
Yeah, Dr. Meriwether, tell us a little bit, just the initial part, what got it started, and then Travis, tell us about the case itself and how that culminated.
Well, it was in a political philosophy class. It was the very first day of class, and a student raised his hand to ask a question, and so I referred to him as "Yes, sir." And the student approached me after class and said, "I want you to refer to me as female." Now, this is a student who is very clearly male, and I explained to him that I couldn't do that, and he basically threatened to get me fired. Went to the administration. The administration approached me. Initially, the administration was willing to find an accommodation if I did not refer to the student as male or female, and I was willing to do that. I was happy to do that, but that was not good enough for the student. The university changed course and began to require that I use the student's preferred pronouns and title in class. And that's when I said, well, I cannot do that. And so they essentially disciplined me. They put a letter in my file, and that was when the lawsuit kicked in.
Okay. And that transitions then, you practice law, Travis.
Yes. Dr. Meriwether's case is an example of the government trying to compel people to say things that they don't believe. And that's something that is just fundamentally antithetical to the First Amendment, indeed the concept of being a free people. So we filed a lawsuit on his behalf outlining the multiple ways in which the university's demands violated the First Amendment. And surprisingly, the district court dismissed our case. It ruled that we had not stated even a single legal claim, even though we outlined how this violated the free speech rights of Dr. Meriwether, how it violated his religious freedom rights, numerous other constitutional theories. The district court dismissed all of that, dismissed the case entirely, and so we then had to appeal to the United States Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and the Sixth Circuit heard our argument and reversed the district court in a tremendous victory for faculty free speech rights.
Right.
And so the Sixth Circuit ruled that the government cannot force professors to say things that they don't believe. That's something that should be obvious, but the Sixth Circuit made it very, very clear. And so now Dr. Meriwether is free to speak according to his beliefs. Nobody can compel him to speak a certain ideological message that he disagrees with. Because the Sixth Circuit recognized that if universities can force somebody like Dr. Meriwether to say things he doesn't believe, then it can require a pacifist to declare that war is just. It can force a civil rights icon to criticize the freedom riders. It could force a believer to deny the existence of God, or it could force a Soviet immigrant to refer to his students or colleagues as comrade. And that's just something that's antithetical to what we're all about here in the United States and what our freedoms mean. So the Sixth Circuit just got it right. And it's a tremendous victory, not just for Dr. Meriwether, but for all faculty members who are now much freer to speak according to their beliefs.
Yeah, and I think I can say I appreciate the courage that you had to move forward with that too, Dr. Meriwether, because like Jordan Peterson, you were challenged by people to force you, to compel you to say certain things that you didn't necessarily agree with. But unlike him, he never had to go legal with it. You did.
Right. I did have to do that.
That's pretty bold because, why did you think it was so important to draw this line in the sand by taking a stance you took? I mean, you could have just capitulated and concede to the students' desires and, go along to get along. And maybe later we can talk about the virtue of courage in the classroom. Right. But why did you think that was such an important line to draw?
Well, there are several reasons. One is that I'm philosophically opposed to the view that a person's biology and his gender can be two completely different things. So I would have been basically supporting an ideology that I didn't agree with. It also violates my beliefs as a Christian that God created us male and female. Another major motivation for me is that the Bible is very, very clear about our not speaking lies. You see many references to it. I probably should have collected some of the verses, but they're not hard to find. So to speak something that isn't true merely for the sake of going along is actually forbidden in Scripture. And so, at least for those reasons, I simply could not go along with it. I also was worried, I should point out, I was also very, very worried about freedom of speech on campus, academic freedom. I thought that this was a frontal assault on academic freedom and freedom of speech.
And let me add to that he also had no choice. We tried to work things out with the university. I mean, he offered an accommodation to the student here, trying to be respectful to the student without compromising his convictions. And the university brushed that aside and said it wasn't good enough. And so we went through a months-long appeal process with the university trying to work this out before going legal, as you say. But the university persisted in disciplining him and refused to rescind that disciplinary action. And so at that point, he had no choice but to invoke his rights under the law and insist that the university respect the First Amendment.
Yes, that's a very important point. I almost certainly, to my mind anyway, would have been fired by now. It wasn't like I had a choice whether, I could maybe go along or not go along and things would go on as before. That wasn't the case. I would almost certainly be fired.
Yeah, and again, thankful for the work of Alliance Defending Freedom.
Right.
It makes the university a better place, a place that it was supposed to be, a place where you could actually debate contentious claims rather than being compelled to go along with some particular viewpoint. So going a bit deeper than Dr. Meriwether, what are some of the philosophical assumptions, both in terms of political philosophy and metaphysics, you teach both, surrounding the gender debate? And let me just preface with this. There was a recent article that someone sent me from the American Reformer titled Christians Volunteering Pronouns by Southern Baptist Theological Seminary ethics professor Andrew Walker. And there are some interesting points that Walker makes in here. We may agree or disagree with various parts of the article, but he talks about how he was in a collaborative environment with at least one person who is a well-known gay rights activist, an advocate, and started commenting, the gay rights activist, commenting on how the practice of stating pronouns was becoming oppressive and absurd. And I'd noticed over the last 2 weeks on Twitter, there was this new hashtag that was out there called hashtag LGB and drop the T. And it wasn't by conservatives. It wasn't by Christians.
Right.
This was by gays, lesbians, and members of the bi community sick of what's going on with the politicization of
Right.
that group.
Interesting.
And then you get Richard Dawkins, who gets the Humanist Award taken from him about a year or two ago because he tweeted out something like, if someone in the transgender community can claim to be opposite in their psychology from their biology and their body, then why can't someone like Rachel Dolezal, who is clearly white, claim and self-identify to be black? What's going on here? It seems like there is room for debate. It seems like, is disagreement denigration? What are some of the philosophical assumptions here, and why is this such a hot issue?
Well, that is actually the philosophical assumptions are one thing. The nature of the movement is another. And I have been spending quite a bit of time trying to understand what exactly is behind this. A lot of people have, obviously. Of course, links are being made to Marxism and critical theory. I did my dissertation at Purdue on Jürgen Habermas.
Oh.
So this is, according to a lot of folks who have looked at it very carefully, this is an extension of critical theory into both critical race theory and then gender identity ideology. And I think that is certainly the philosophical pedigree of what we're seeing. So there's, on the one hand, there's this, as it were, the sociological phenomenon of people thinking that they may actually be a gender that doesn't align with their biological sex. On the other hand, there is this incredible movement behind it that arguably is trying to completely overturn and replace Western culture, Western civilization with a kind of revolution, a cultural revolution. So I do think that there's a difference between a student sitting in my class who thinks he may be a female and this broader ideological movement, but I don't think that we should ignore those connections. Because certainly, from the standpoint of the administration, they are buying into the identity as part of a movement. That's where you see the offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion sprouting up everywhere.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. It's another connection you and I have then, because I took a graduate course on Marxism, probably from a similar professor. And
was it William McBride?
William McBride, and I was later published in Marxist Thought in a journal too.
Oh yes.
2 years ago, someone who is an ideological arch enemy of mine in the world of worldview, Peter Boghossian, another philosopher.
Yes.
Peter wrote the book, A Manual for Creating Atheists. Well, he invited me to lecture in his 300-level seminar on atheism. It's an atheism seminar on arguments for God's existence. And then we went out to lunch after, and he proposed an alliance because he said, I'm done with the atheism-theism debate. He said, this is about civilization now, and I'm dedicating my career to fighting critical social justice, critical theory. And so we went on tour to 4 different universities, and we were talking about viewpoint diversity. And because of that term, viewpoint diversity, it's code word apparently for racism, they tried to cancel us at one university, calling us logical fascists. So I guess this brings up a point of interest then here with this critical theory, this postmodern movement that's taking place in our country. It's a revolution. And as this article brought up at one point, his point was that, this is not just we should name the pronoun issue for what it is. It's a language game. Language is about naming reality. It's about wielding power. And when I saw that, I thought, that sounds like Robin DiAngelo and other people in the movement that are
and actually George
trying
Orwell.
to co-opt the
Orwell recognizes this. Absolutely. The newspeak. If you can get people to talk in a particular way, they will eventually begin to think in that way.
Yeah, and so your take earlier, you said, number one, I disagree with it. The Bible talks about lying, and I don't think that represents reality. But number two, it seems to feed into a subversive movement that is revolutionizing the country. It's not just about this person or that person, but it's a movement of cancel culture that doesn't even appreciate viewpoint diversity on the campuses.
Yes, it has absolutely nothing to do with viewpoint diversity. It has to do with our being coerced through our speech into adopting an ideology that for many of us, including atheists, liberals, and so forth, we simply do not accept. And it's being done in the name of being empathetic and being kind and being inclusive, when as a matter of fact, it's the opposite of those on almost every level. It's a very, very harmful ideology. I think that back in 2018, people were not quite as aware as we are today as to how incredibly dangerous this ideology is. It's not just for women's sports. It's also pubertal blockers for pre-adolescents receiving irreversible chemical castration, sometimes even without the knowledge of their parents. This is a DEFCON 1 emergency in our culture. It goes far. I do think it's a matter of freedom of speech and academic freedom, and those are extremely important, but it's also a much, much broader cultural revolution. We need to be very concerned.
Right. I think a lot of people see this as, it's just the age-old debate between Democrats and Republicans or conservatives.
Yeah, no, that is a total misinterpretation.
Foreign ideology ensconcing itself in the universities, and then from campus to culture, we're all living on campus today, aren't we?
But it's major corporations. Yep. It's also in the entertainment industry, the sports industry. So it is quite pervasive. I wanted to come back to what you said about Peter Boghossian. I did a lecture with James Lindsay. And I had a nice visit with him after we had dinner together. And he's an atheist, and his early publications were on atheism. And I could tell exactly the same thing. He was basically saying, the whole atheist theist thing, we can debate that later, but at least we were on the same foundation. We believed in reason, we believed in logic, we believed in evidence. This is something entirely different. And so he wasn't even interested in that kind of topic anymore, I could tell, because he thinks this is so much more dangerous and so much more relevant. Of course, his specialty is critical race theory.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. When Boghossian first asked me to consider an alliance,
that's interesting.
I thought, okay, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and we have built a friendship now, and family friends, yes. and care for each other as individuals. But I said, okay, but remember, you're the one who brought this on, not you, but your position, because you created in these naturalistic laboratories this virus that morphed and became a Frankenstein, and now you guys can't control it, and now you're coming to us for what you call the Great Realignment.
Wow. So now, I hate to be the interviewer, but what did he say to that? Because I thought about saying that to James Lindsay, but I didn't have the courage.
Yeah.
You guys started this mess.
Yeah, I did. So we had good conversations together. I hope to connect with him actually next month when I'm in his area. But let me ask a different question for both of you. Getting practical now. Advice for Christians, or anyone for that matter, because you do have Boghossian, who now refers to himself as a skeptic, not primarily as an atheist, and Lindsay, who now refers to himself as an agnostic, not an atheist.
Wow.
Very interesting. But advice for Christians, or for any one who doesn't seem to be overcome by this spell that's invading our country in the West, serving in secular academia relative to the transgender or pronoun issues. There is a question about how one can respond without getting in trouble legally, Travis, and maybe you can comment first on that. And then another question about how we ought to respond with moral conscience, and that's where the issue of courage comes in. So maybe Travis, can you bring it home for us in terms of the legal issue? How can a Christian or anyone who believes in freedom respond on this issue legally?
Well, I think that we need to address, frankly, the moral issue first, because
Okay.
and then look at what legal protections exist, because legal protections may differ from one context to another. But first and foremost, as Christians, how should we respond to this? And frankly, we have to just remember that we are called to be faithful to Christ. And being faithful to Christ means being willing to stand for the truth and being willing to speak the truth. So we cannot allow ourselves to speak things that are just simply false. Like Dr. Meriwether was saying, he could not lie to his students. And we should not allow ourselves to be drafted into lying to those around us. And that's what this is. It's telling somebody who is confused, who deserves compassion and respect, but it's telling someone who is confused something that's not true and that then contributes to the further confusion. That is not a loving act at all.
Right.
1 Corinthians talks about how love does not rejoice in iniquity, but it rejoices in the truth. So we have to be first and foremost willing to speak the truth. Could that come with a cost? Sure. But you know what? The Lord is the one that's in control of the consequences. And Dr. Meriwether is a tremendous example of how God can work through the legal system to vindicate someone who is willing to stand for the truth. He took a stand on his campus. Even after the case was dismissed by the district court, he continued to stand. Even at the risk of being fired, he continued to stand. And as a result, God worked through the Sixth Circuit to put in place now a precedent that defends not only his right to speak and his right to live according to his faith, but the rights of so many thousands and thousands of other professors and other Americans in that area of the country. So we have to first recognize that we have to be faithful and then leave the consequences of the faithfulness to God. And yes, are there legal protections? Of course there are legal protections defending your right to be able to speak and live according to your beliefs. Dr. Meriwether's case shows that those legal rights can be invoked, and that we can use the legal system to ensure that those rights are respected. But first and foremost, we have to be willing to stand.
Okay. And so just before, Dr. Meriwether, before you respond to how ought we respond, so it seems like this issue has really gone beyond free speech with what Peter Boghossian would call cognitive liberty.
Yes.
And so, I see, like in the article that I had mentioned earlier, the ethics professor said, I would respond this way. Hi, my name is Andrew. It's really nice to meet everyone today. Out of respect for my own conscience and views on the matter, I'm going to refrain from stating my pronouns, but I'm otherwise very excited to be here today and looking forward to our meeting. Well, that sounds nice, but today it's if you believe the wrong thing, if you've violated some kind of blasphemy law and you've got to pay the price. So you can't get away with it. If someone finds out you disagree, somehow they think that's denigration. They think that debate is hate and mere disagreement is just denigration. You somehow hate the person. So from your perspective, this is a real dicey area now. It's not just free speech, but freedom of conscience. How ought one respond to this issue?
Well, I liked what he said. I thought what he said was fine. You could explain to the group that I have conscience issues and philosophical and theological issues with identifying myself according to my pronouns, because I don't hold to gender identity theory. You could even be specific about it, but that is going to be offensive in and of itself. So you mentioned Jordan Peterson earlier. He made this point. He made it quite brilliantly, like he does a lot of things. He said that disagreement is painful. When people do not agree with each other, it kind of hurts, and that's why we get angry. So the mere fact that you do not go along with it is going to cause anger or resentment or bitterness, or I don't know how actually fearful people become. They claim they're afraid. They claim they feel unsafe. we can go ahead and accept that. But basically, anytime you disagree and take a position that other people aren't taking, it is going to tweak them. They're going to feel uncomfortable with it. And that's just something that we have to do. We have to do it as Christians. We have to do it as scholars. We have to do it as citizens. We have to speak our mind and not be intimidated by that. Because some of that probably is genuine and sincere, but some of it is an effort to shut down the opposition. And this tool is becoming extremely effective in keeping people from even raising objections to what's being done or said. And so we have to keep doing what we've been doing, or we need to start doing what we're not doing. But we need to be polite. I like the way he put it. I thought that was a very civil, friendly way of putting it. And there will be the Peter Boghossians and the James Lindsays in the audience who may not agree with our reasons for what the positions we take, but they'll respect us for taking the view that we take. And I think we can win some crucial allies by remaining civil.
I think that some of this is also going to require a bit of an attitude change on the part of Christians as we move more and more into a culture that is not hospitable to our beliefs. You know, I thought Dr. Walker made a great point when he talked about how politeness does not mean paving over our convictions, and how discomfort in and of itself is not necessarily sinful. In fact, that's often necessary in order to recognize what the truth is. So we have to become aware that that's going to be a natural outgrowth of living a faithful Christian life in an increasingly hostile environment. And then, yeah, when somebody objects, when the disciplinary actions flow, then I think it's important for folks to recognize that there are organizations out there like ADF that are willing to stand with them and advise them and help them through that process, whether that process is just letters to HR or whether the process is litigation like it was for Dr. Meriwether. And then you can call ADF. The call is free. By God's grace, we're able to provide our advice for free, but we're ready. We stand willing and ready to advise and counsel with folks who are going through this process and help tailor a legal response to their specific situation.
Yeah, very good, very good. It reminds me also of, I think it was Voltaire who said, or at least his biographer, who put his thoughts succinctly: I may disagree with what you say, but I would defend to the death your right to say it. Whereas Stalin is alleged to have said, ideas are more powerful than weapons. We don't allow our enemies to have weapons, so why should we let them have ideas? And so this whole area of cancel culture, there's a cost, I think, to us not speaking up, whether it's libertarian, atheist, Christian, or whatever, thinking about our culture right now and where we're at, that we can't even have a healthy debate, as if debate is hate. So I did approach Peter Boghossian when I first met him, and I encouraged him to be like John the Baptist. He was curious why I would say that, and I said, similar to Jordan Peterson. They never touched Peterson because they knew that the populace liked Peterson. And I said, if you keep this down low, you're going to be fired from Portland State. You need to go public with this, and you need to fight back with these bullies, because that's how you deal with bullies. You don't acquiesce to hostage takers' demands, or pirates, or bullies, or terrorists like that, because then they'll be encouraged to do it more. The way to deal with that, I think, is to actually have the philosophical, classical virtue of courage, or the Christian virtue of courage, and to do the right thing, because you both would agree, I think, there is a cost for not speaking up.
There's a cost for not speaking up, and even worse, there's a cost if you are co-opted into speaking the other side's lingo. You know, Robert George said it as was quoted in the Walker.
Yes, it's very powerful.
That authoritarians try to stop people from speaking the truth. Totalitarians try to compel them to speak lies. And we should not allow ourselves to be compelled to speak lies at any cost.
Right. Well, that's a good way to culminate this time together on Thoughtful Christianity. Freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and what are your pronouns? Thanks for sharing the time with us, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.